If you're reading this, I made it to the 4th stop. That's what the note said. Folded. Taped to the metal floor of a locked car. Written by a man who disappeared 3 days earlier from a scenic overlook in Washington State. Brian Caldwell was 29, a cartographer, the kind of person who triple-checked everything. He told his roommate he'd be back by Sunday. He told his sister he was going up the coast to take photos. He told no one about 4 stops. On September 14th, 1987, Brian pulled into Cascade Point, a gravel turnout where tourists admire the valley below. His car was found 72 hours later, doors locked, keys missing, camera abandoned on the dash, hiking boots still tied in the footwell. Search teams found no trace of him, no footprints, no torn fabric, no blood, but they found the note. It was hidden deliberately, as if Brian expected someone to search the car, as if he knew he might not come back. And the phrasing, "I made it to the 4th stop," suggests this wasn't an accident. It was a destination, a sequence he'd been following, but no one knew what the stops were, or where the first 3 had been, or why Brian had risked everything to reach the 4th. This is a story about a man who left clues in the place no one thought to look. Before we follow the trail he left behind, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe if you're into unsolved mysteries where the answers are hidden in plain sight. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have followed Brian's route? Because what investigators discovered at the 4th stop changes everything, and the answer is darker than anyone expected. Brian Caldwell was 29 years old when he disappeared. He worked as a cartographer for the Washington State Department of Natural Resources, drafting topographic maps and updating trail systems. Colleagues described him as methodical, detail-oriented, and a little obsessive. He kept lists. He triple-checked his work. He never missed deadlines. If Brian said he'd be somewhere, he was there. He lived in Olympia, sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with a college friend named Marcus. The two had little in common. Marcus was social, spontaneous, a weekend musician. Brian preferred solitude. He spent his free time hiking remote trails, photographing abandoned structures, and keeping a leather-bound journal he never let anyone read. Marcus once joked that Brian treated his life like a classified project. Brian didn't laugh. In early September 1987, Brian requested a Friday off work. He told his supervisor he needed a long weekend to scout potential trail updates along the northern coast. It wasn't unusual. Brian often combined work research with personal photography trips. He packed light, a duffel bag with clothes, his 35mm camera, a road atlas, and a thermos of coffee. He left Thursday evening, telling Marcus he'd return by Sunday night. Marcus reminded him to bring back film. Brian nodded and closed the door. The Cascade Point Overlook sits roughly 90 miles north of Olympia, perched above a forested valley where the Cascade River bends through Douglas fir and hemlock. It's a wide gravel pullout with space for 5 or 6 vehicles, bordered by a wooden guardrail and a weathered interpretive sign describing the geology below. On a clear day, you can see 30 miles. In autumn, fog rolls through the basin by mid-morning, turning the landscape ghostly and soft. It's peaceful. It's unremarkable. Hundreds of people stop there every month. Brian's car was discovered on Monday, September 17th, by a highway maintenance worker named Dale Pruitt. Dale noticed the blue Ford Tempo parked at the far end of the overlook, facing the guardrail. He'd driven past the same spot Friday afternoon and was certain the car hadn't been there. Now it was, alone, no other vehicles nearby. Dale figured someone had broken down and hitched a ride, but something about the stillness bothered him. He pulled over and walked to the driver's side window. The car was locked. The interior looked untouched. A camera rested on the dashboard. A folded map sat on the passenger seat. Hiking boots were visible in the footwell, neatly positioned, laces tied. Dale peered through the glass, half expecting to see someone slumped in the back. No one. He radioed it in. Sheriff's deputies arrived within the hour. They ran the plates and identified the vehicle as registered to Brian Caldwell. A welfare check at his apartment found Marcus confused and worried. Brian hadn't called, hadn't returned, hadn't answered his pager. The deputies forced entry to the tempo. Nothing inside suggested struggle or panic. The ignition was off. The keys were missing. Brian's duffel bag was gone. But his camera, a piece of equipment he never traveled without, sat abandoned. Search and rescue teams deployed the following morning. They worked outward from the Overlook in concentric circles, checking trails, ravines, and creek beds. Bloodhounds picked up no scent trail. Helicopters scanned the canopy. Divers checked the river below. For 2 weeks, volunteers combed the wilderness. They found no clothing, no footprints, no disturbance. It was as if Brian had stepped out of his car and evaporated. The case stalled. Theories circulated. He'd fallen, been taken by an animal, suffered a medical emergency. But none explained the locked car, the missing keys, or the abandoned camera. Investigators labeled it a cold missing person case and moved on. Brian's family held a small memorial. Marcus packed up his roommate's belongings. The tempo went to impound. And there, beneath the floor mat, the hidden note waited in silence. The impound lot in Tumwater processed dozens of abandoned vehicles each month. Most sat rusting for weeks before auction. Brian's tempo arrived in late October, 6 weeks after his disappearance. The case was cold. The family had been notified. The car was just another piece of unclaimed property. A technician named Ray Delgado was assigned to prep it for sale. Ray had worked impound for 11 years. He'd seen cars left behind after arrests, after fleeing accidents, after owners simply walked away from debt. The job was routine. Photograph the interior, empty personal items, vacuum the seats, check for damage. Ray approached Brian's car with a clipboard and a trash bag. He opened the driver's door and immediately noticed how clean everything was. No fast food wrappers, no receipts, no coffee stains on the upholstery. The camera on the dash caught his attention. It looked expensive. He logged it, then moved to the floor mats. Standard procedure was to pull them, shake them out, and vacuum the carpet underneath. When Ray lifted the driver's side mat, he saw it. A folded piece of notebook paper, taped flat to the metal floor with clear packing tape. The edges were crisp. The tape was fresh. It hadn't been there long. Ray crouched, peeled it free, and unfolded it. The handwriting was blocky, deliberate, written in blue ballpoint pen. One sentence. No signature, no date. Just, "If you're reading this, I made it to the 4th stop." Ray stared at it. Then he walked it to his supervisor. The note reached the sheriff's department within hours. Detectives reopened Brian's file and compared the handwriting to samples from his work documents. It matched. The note was authentic. Brian had written it. But when? And why hide it under a floor mat? Detective Laura Voss was assigned to lead the follow-up investigation. She was a 15-year veteran with a reputation for solving cases others abandoned. She sat in the evidence room with Brian's case file spread before her. Witness statements, search reports, photos of the Overlook, and now this note. She read it a dozen times, parsing every word. "If you're reading this, I made it to the 4th stop." The phrasing was crucial. Brian didn't write, "If I disappear," or "if something happens." He wrote, "If you're reading this," an assumption someone would find the note. He expected this scenario, and "I made it" implied intention. He'd been trying to reach something, a destination, a sequence. Voss began with Brian's known movements. She pulled his credit card records. On Thursday, September 13th, Brian purchased gas in Olympia at 6:47 p.m., 16 gallons, enough to drive several hundred miles. The next charge appeared Friday morning, a gas station in Mount Vernon, 78 miles north, at 9:03 a.m. He'd driven through the night or left very early. After that, no further transactions, no ATM withdrawals, no restaurant receipts. Either Brian used cash or he stopped spending. Voss studied a map. Mount Vernon to Cascade Point was another 30 miles northeast. If Brian gassed up in Mount Vernon around 9 a.m., he could have reached the Overlook by 10, but his car wasn't spotted there until Monday. Where was he for 3 days? She interviewed Marcus again. He confirmed Brian had seemed distracted the week before his trip, more quiet than usual, writing in his journal late at night, making phone calls he didn't explain. Marcus assumed it was work stress. When pressed, he remembered Brian asking an odd question the night before he left. If you had to hide something so only the right person would find it, where would you put it? Marcus had laughed it off. Now, sitting across from Voss, he looked pale. Voss closed her notebook. The note wasn't a cry for help. It was a breadcrumb. Brian had hidden it deliberately, knowing that if something went wrong, investigators would eventually search his car. He was counting on it. But counting on it for what? Detective Voss returned to the Cascade Point Overlook on a gray November morning. She stood where Brian's car had been found, scanning the tree line, the guardrail, the gravel beneath her boots. Search teams had covered this ground weeks ago. They'd found nothing, but they hadn't been looking for stops. She pulled out the note again, reading it in the cold air. I made it to the 4th stop. The phrasing suggested a sequence, a route, something deliberate. If the Overlook was involved, was it the 4th stop, or had Brian gone somewhere after? Voss drove the route Brian had taken, Olympia to Mount Vernon to Cascade Point. She noted every scenic pullout, rest area, and trailhead. There were dozens. Without knowing what defined a stop, she was searching blind. Back at the station, she assigned a junior detective named Tim Ruiz to sift through Brian's apartment belongings, which Marcus had boxed and stored. Ruiz spent 2 days sorting through clothes, books, photography equipment, and file folders. Most of it was ordinary: work documents, trail maps, receipts for camera gear. Then, at the bottom of a cardboard box, Ruiz found the journal. It was leather-bound, about 5 by 7 inches, with a strap that wrapped twice and buckled. The pages were dense with Brian's handwriting: dates, observations, sketches of landscapes, notes on light exposure for photographs. Ruiz flipped through carefully. Most entries were mundane. August 12th. Tested new lens at Miller, Sylvania. Overcast. Poor contrast. September 3rd. Reviewed trail survey data. Recommended updates for Ridge Access Route 7. Then, on September 9th, 5 days before Brian disappeared, the tone shifted. The entry read, "Spoke with E again. He insists the sequence is real. 4 locations, all connected by the old freight routes. Says the 4th is the hardest to reach, off any map I've seen. He won't say what's there, only that people have tried and most give up. Some don't come back. I told him it sounds like folklore. He said folklore doesn't leave coordinates." Ruiz felt his pulse quicken. He kept reading. September 11th. Confirmed the first 3 stops using E's directions. All match historical records. Abandoned depots from the 1910s, 1920s. Logging operations mostly. The 4th doesn't appear in any state archive. E says it was deliberate. Hidden even then. I'm going Friday. If this is real, it changes everything I thought I knew about the northern routes. September 12th. Prepared the car. Hid a note under the mat in case something goes wrong. If I don't make it back, someone needs to know I reached the 4th. This isn't a disappearance, it's a completion. That was the last entry. Ruiz brought the journal to Voss. She read the passages 3 times, then leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. Brian hadn't vanished on impulse. He'd been planning this for at least a week, possibly longer. And he'd been working with someone identified only as E. Voss ran the name through Brian's known contacts. No matches. She checked his work phone logs. On September 8th, Brian had received a call from a payphone in Bellingham, a small city near the Canadian border. The call lasted 11 minutes. Voss noted the location. The journal mentioned old freight routes and abandoned depots. Voss pulled historical records from the state archives, focusing on logging operations in northwest Washington from 1910 to 1930. The region had been laced with narrow-gauge rail lines, used to haul timber from remote valleys to coastal mills. Most were decommissioned by the 1940s. The tracks were torn up. The depots were left to rot. But if Brian had identified 4 of them and believed the 4th was significant enough to risk his safety, then someone else knew about them too. Voss picked up her phone and called the Bellingham police. She needed to find a payphone. And she needed to find E. The Bellingham Police Department pulled records for the payphone Brian had called. It was located outside a hardware store on Samish Way, a busy commercial street near the waterfront. The phone itself had been removed 2 months after Brian's disappearance, part of a city initiative to eliminate obsolete infrastructure. No surveillance cameras had been nearby. No logs existed of other calls made from that location. Voss hit a wall. Without knowing who E was, she couldn't trace the source of Brian's information. She returned to the journal, searching for clues. One passage stood out. September 10th. E said the second stop still has the old foreman's cabin. Roof collapsed, but the foundation's intact. Found it exactly where he said, 2 miles off Route 20, hidden by alder growth. No trail, no signs. I wouldn't have located it without his directions. Voss pulled a map. Route 20 ran east from the coast, threading through the North Cascades. She cross-referenced historical logging records and found mention of a depot near Marble Mount, decommissioned in 1923. The coordinates aligned with Brian's description. She and Ruiz drove out the following week. The coordinates led them to a dirt logging road, overgrown and barely passable. They hiked 2 miles through dense brush, following a creek bed, and there, exactly as Brian had described, they found it. A collapsed structure, rotted timbers, half buried in moss, a stone foundation crumbling into the soil. Voss photographed everything. She searched the ruins for signs Brian had been there. In the northeast corner, beneath a fallen beam, she found a small cairn. 3 stacked stones, deliberately placed. Beside it, scratched into the soft earth with a stick, were the initials BC and a date, 9/13. Brian had been here, the day before his car was found at Cascade Point. Ruiz knelt beside the cairn. So this is the second stop? Or the first? Voss said quietly. We don't know the order. They returned to the station and expanded the search. Using Brian's journal and historical records, Voss identified 2 more abandoned depot sites within 100 miles, one near Concrete, another near Darrington. Both were remote. Both were accessible only by rough trails or decommissioned roads. Both had been part of the same regional logging network in the early 1900s. Voss dispatched teams to search each location. At the Concrete site, investigators found another cairn, initials, and a date, 9/12. At the Darrington site, the same. Brian had visited all 3 in sequence, marking each one, documenting his progress. 3 stops, 3 cairns, 3 dates, but the journal mentioned 4. Voss returned to Brian's September 11th entry. The 4th doesn't appear in any state archive. E says it was deliberate, hidden even then. If the 4th stop wasn't in official records, how had E known about it? And why had it been hidden? Voss dug deeper into the logging history. She found a reference in a 1921 county newspaper, a brief article about a freight depot being decommissioned and sealed after an accident. The article didn't specify the nature of the accident, only that operations had ceased and the site was considered unsafe. The location wasn't named, but the article mentioned it was northwest of the Cascade Pass, inaccessible by standard routes. Voss cross-referenced the description with topographic maps. There was a valley northwest of Cascade Pass, steep and isolated, with no marked trails. Old surveyor maps from the 1920s showed a thin line, possibly a rail spur, leading into the valley. It terminated at a blank space. No label. No depot marked. Voss placed a pin on the map. If Brian's car had been found at Cascade Point, and the fourth stop was northwest of there. Then Brian had likely continued on foot. The terrain was brutal. Dense forest, sharp elevation changes, no maintained paths. It would take hours to reach, maybe longer. And if Brian had made it to the fourth stop, why hadn't he come back? Voss assembled a search team. 2 experienced trackers, a wilderness medic, and Ruiz. They departed at dawn on a cold December morning, hiking northwest from Cascade Point into terrain that hadn't been surveyed in decades. The old rail spur Brian's journal referenced was long gone, reclaimed by forest. They navigated by compass and elevation, following the contour lines Voss had marked on her map. The valley was silent. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of their boots on frozen ground and the occasional crack of a branch underfoot. After 3 hours, they reached a ridgeline and looked down into a narrow basin, choked with hemlock and vine maple. At the far end, barely visible through the trees, was a structure. It was partially collapsed, built from timber and stone, with a corrugated metal roof caved inward. The walls were still standing, blackened by age and weather. Ruiz recognized it immediately from historical photos. A logging depot, circa 1920s, designed to house equipment and store cut timber before transport. This one had been abandoned in place. They descended carefully. As they approached, Voss noticed something odd. The entrance was blocked by a rusted iron gate, chained and padlocked. The lock was modern, installed within the last few decades. Someone had sealed this place deliberately. Ruiz examined the chain. Bolt cutters? Voss nodded. They cut through. The gate swung open with a metallic groan. Inside, the depot was dark and cold. The roof had collapsed in the center, letting in shafts of gray light. The floor was dirt, littered with rotted timber and broken glass. Along the back wall, shelves still stood, empty except for rusted tools and a few disintegrating burlap sacks. And in the corner, pressed against the stone foundation, was a backpack. Voss's breath caught. She approached slowly. The pack was modern, nylon, dark green, covered in dust. She knelt and opened it. Inside, a flashlight, a water bottle, a granola bar wrapper, and a small notebook. She opened the notebook. The first page, in Brian's handwriting. September 14th, 1987. I made it. E was right. The entry continued. The fourth stop is real. The depot was sealed for a reason. Not because of an accident, but because of what they found here. Old records inside, logbooks, maps, evidence of a fifth route, never completed. E said people have tried to find it. Some succeeded. None came back to report it. I don't know if that's legend or warning. Another page. The gate was already open when I arrived. Someone else has been here recently. Boot prints in the dust. I'm not alone. The final entry, written in hurried script. I hear something outside. Movement. Not animal. Staying inside until it's clear. If I don't make it back, the note is under the mat. The sequence is real. The fourth is the end. The notebook ended there. Voss stood slowly, scanning the depot. In the far corner, near the collapsed roof, she saw it. A body, partially concealed beneath fallen beams. The team moved quickly. They cleared the debris carefully. The remains were skeletal, dressed in hiking clothes, a canvas jacket still intact. The boots matched the description Marcus had given of Brian's. In the jacket pocket, they found his driver's license. Brian Caldwell had died here, not from exposure, not from injury. The bones showed no sign of trauma. The medic estimated he'd been deceased for weeks, possibly longer. The cause was unclear. Possibly dehydration, possibly hypothermia, possibly something else. But the timeline didn't match. Brian's journal said he'd arrived on the 14th. His car was found 3 days later. He hadn't stayed here the entire time. He'd gone somewhere. Or something had kept him. Voss searched the depot again, more carefully, and beneath the shelves, scratched into the stone wall, she found one last message. The fifth is real. Don't follow. The investigation closed in February 1988. Brian Caldwell's remains were returned to his family. The official cause of death was listed as exposure, though the medical examiner noted inconsistencies. Brian's body showed no signs of struggle, no defensive wounds, no obvious trauma. He'd simply stopped, as if he'd laid down and chosen not to continue. Detective Voss couldn't let it go. She returned to the depot twice more, searching for the 5th route Brian had mentioned. She found no additional maps, no logbooks, no records. The old shelves were empty. Whatever Brian had seen inside the depot was gone, taken, hidden, or destroyed. She tracked down the chain of ownership for the depot. The land had been sold by the logging company in 1924 to a private buyer, then resold multiple times before being absorbed into state forest land in 1963. The lock on the gate had been installed by the Forest Service in 1979 after reports of trespassers and vandalism. No one could explain why a routine depot required sealing or what had been inside to warrant it. Voss never found E. The payphone in Bellingham yielded no leads. She interviewed retired loggers, historians, and local archivists. A few recalled rumors, stories of a lost route in the Northern Cascades, a rail line that had been started but never finished, abandoned after workers reported strange occurrences, missing tools, footprints where no one had walked, voices in the trees. The stories were vague, inconsistent, passed down through generations like campfire tales. One retired surveyor, a man named Arthur Denny, remembered something. In 1953, he'd been part of a crew tasked with mapping uncharted forest land northwest of Cascade Pass. They'd found remnants of an old rail bed, overgrown and barely visible. It led into a ravine so steep and dense they'd turned back. Denny said the crew had joked about it, called it the Ghost Line. He didn't know if it went anywhere. He'd never heard of anyone following it to the end. Voss filed her final report in March. The case was closed. Brian's death was ruled accidental. The depot was resealed, the gate reinforced with a heavier chain. The Forest Service posted no trespassing signs. The 4th stop became once again a forgotten place. But the story didn't end. In 1995, a hiker named Laura Simmons reported finding a cairn near the old Marble Mount depot, the 2nd stop. She'd photographed it, uploaded the image to an early internet hiking forum, and asked if anyone knew what it meant. Someone replied with a link to Brian's case. Someone else mentioned the 4th stop. Within weeks, a small online community had formed dedicated to researching the sequence. They called themselves the Freight Seekers. They hiked the routes. They found the cairns. They documented everything. Some claimed to have reached the 4th depot. A few posted photos of the interior, though the gate had been resealed and they had to climb through gaps in the collapsed roof. No one admitted to finding the 5th route. No one claimed to have followed it. In 2003, a user named Echo Trail posted a message. "I found it. The 5th is real. I'm going in tomorrow. If I don't post again, you'll know why." They never posted again. Their account went silent. The forum debated whether it was a hoax. Voss, now retired, sometimes checks the forum. She reads the posts, the theories, the warnings. She thinks about Brian, about the note under the floor mat, about the message scratched into stone. She wonders if E is still out there, still whispering directions to those who ask the right questions. She wonders if the 5th route is real. And if it is, what waits at the end? Some mysteries don't want to be solved. Some stops are final. And some messages are meant as warnings, not invitations. Brian made it to the 4th. He tried to tell us not to go further. We should have listened.